Welcome everybody to today's conference in commemoration is probably the wrong word, on the occasion of International Women's Day. The theme of women and gender, representations of gender, has been running through most of our programming this spring. We've looked at the collection in Villa La Pietra and the images of women in the collection, and used those images as the starting point for a discussion not only of women as they were represented in the time those paintings were painted and the collection was assembled, but now how those images and the themes in those images reverberate in contemporary society. We know from the images in the collection that the violence against women in the popular imagination has been a useful tool of control and caution to female assertions of agency throughout history. It should then be not much of a surprise when we read a report that was released on Monday that 35% of women worldwide have experienced either physical and or sexual intimate partner violence or non-partner sexual violence, according to the World Health Organization. The report that was published on Monday is by an organization called Equality Now, which is a US-based NGO. Equality Now says, by any measure, gender-based violence, including sexual violence, is being inflicted on women and girls in epidemic proportions. So moving from the images in the collection to today's conference, I'd like to recognize and thank Professor Deborah Spini, who's all the way in the back of the room, for taking up our invitation to organize today's conference, and we hope to do more in the future. And I'd like to also recognize and introduce Virginia Cox, our academic director, who's with us this morning, which is, thank you for coming. And I turn it to you, Deborah.
Thank you very much. I would like just to say a few words, and you know how sincerely and genuinely happy I am to begin this study day together. And although the theme that we are going to consider, that is violence and gender-based violence, is obviously, rather a heartbreaking theme, let's hope that this day will end up, with an empowering character, because indeed we want to study violence and oppression, but also in order to find creative solutions and patterns of resistance and overcoming and empowering. And so this is my wish for today. I don't want to take any more time, because we have quite a rich, actually, panel of speakers. Let me just say that now I shall call upon Professor Lucia Re from the University of Florence, who's been gracious enough as to be with us as a chair for the morning. Lucia, eccoci. Actually, I would like to say that Lucia, besides a scholarly competence on the topic, is also part of a network of women in the University of Florence, scholars of the University of Florence, that are actually mobilizing against violence against women. I would like also to call for the first two speakers of the morning, that are going to be Professor Franca Bimbi from the University of Padua and Professor Marina Calloni from Milan-Bicocca. Thank you so much for being with us today. And after that, perhaps Lucia, you shall call the other panelists. As you can see, we have with us Gaia Tomaselli and Elena di Padova. Let me just tell you a little bit. Elena di Padova and Gaia Tomaselli are actually here as activists. They represent, one of them, Artemisia, that is one of the most important anti-violence centers here in Florence. Any Florentine knows Artemisia since ever. E invece Elena di Padova, she's here on the behalf of the campaign Ni una menos. And so, because the point of the panel is to have together scholars and activists. I don't want to take any more time, so I shall now turn the chair to Lucia Re. Thank you again so much for being with us today.
Thank you for being here. Thank you, Professor Spini, for inviting me here. I'm really glad to be here this morning, especially with these two prominent professors and studying gender and studying violence in Italy. Professor Franca Bimbi is a professor in sociology at the University of Padua, and she was one of the first, I think, studying gender violence in Italy. She published many books about gender violence, so I think that she's the best speaker that we could have together with Professor Calloni here. So we really have the most prominent scholars in Italy this morning. Marina Calloni is a professor of political philosophy at the University of Milan-Bicocca, and she worked with the Interministerial Committee for Human Rights, and she's an expert in gender violence. It is not written here in the biography that you will find, but she wrote a book with Simonetta Agnello-Horby about gender violence and the English system tackling gender violence, which is, I think, one of the most interesting examples that we could study. So I leave the floor to Professor Bimbi.
Thank you very much for this invitation and for this wonderful presentation. I could say in any way that I suppose that Marina Calloni and we are activists too. So I can say for Marina, it's true that you are of other generation, especially me. I opened the first, one of the first health clinics, Italian health clinic, in 1972 in Padua, to open the path for the legalization of abortion in Italy. Of course, we were very aware about the difference between the law and the justice, because to help women to have abortion at this time was forbidden by criminal law. This is for me a good introduction for this day, because the overview you invited me to speak is very, very large and not simple. We are in a difficult framework. We have a difficult framework now. A quarter of a century ago, I wrote, "Never again war, never again domination on women and the children, ending extreme poverty, overcoming social inequalities." It was an opening chapter of a book on violence against women. This progressive utopia has nourished our generation, and on this basis we have built links between the women's voice in the public sphere and the feminist politics against gender violence. At the present moment, many questions remain unchallenged. Two of them left a sign in our world, considering 3 or 4 generations before us. Why war? Letters Freud-Einstein, 1934. Taking into consideration the current and the new perception of the suffering of others, to whom we should extend our empathy and our responsibility. This is Franz Boas, arriving in the United States in 1938. Regarding gender-based violence, we find on the floor the same question you have made since the 70s, and especially since the time of the Balkan Wars. What can be the starting point for interpreting the male violence against women? These three questions challenges us dramatically in the light of a resurgence of an old, never-ended question. How should you give recognition to the human rights to leave any country, including his and her own, and to return to his country? United Nations Declaration, Article 13, 1948. The answer for this recurrent question are very difficult, but they are linked. Because compared to 25 years ago, we are not in the twilight of modernity, but in the midst of a new modernity, crossed by contradictory aspects. New women voices are raising and their empowerment is increasing. New forms of cultural and artistic frontiers are opening for women. New forms of feminist humanistic perspectives are developing, overcoming the Western hegemony and presenting possibility for realizing interlocked relationships for women of different language, culture, nation, ethnic group, race, and perhaps classes. We can say that we are living the triumph of the alliance between women engaged in different border of mestiza and the form of transculturalization is also a question. The growing cultural pluralism puts in check not so much the Western universalism as its hegemonic version that claims to sum up all differences within walls of a supposed equality for all. The opening of cultural boxes in the twilight of Northwestern modernity could show new perspective for combination between equality and differences. Nevertheless, in the new modernity brings also terrible withdrawal of rights and the destructions of important links between feminist social practices and the progressive shared understandings, until now taken for granted, and today covered by new ideologies of progress, as it happened in the past. Our interpretation of universalism and our mechanical straight translation of our rights into diverse sensibilities of the other's words could have some effects of torture. This is a quotation, torture from Butler, 2008. What possible space for cultural differences in our common garden instead than in the backyard? We have to remember also the statistical indicator of violence against women. That is, the statistics have verified the highest degree of effects of violence in the most egalitarian country as Sweden and Finland. Otherwise, in Italy, I discuss very much with my friend working with statistics, of course, but this is the number. Otherwise, in Italy, following instead the more recent data, only 30% of women considers the violence received by their partner as a possible crime. That is a measure of internalization of violence by women, indicating that perhaps the extension of symbolic violence in gender relations. I would like to talk about some practical and political effects of the new modernity, which regard in a contradictory way the violence against women, especially at cultural symbolic level, underlying some difficulties for Italian feminist debate. I say Italian too, but I suppose that it is not only in Italian case. The first example, indifference towards mother of many children, too many children, whom we reject from European borders. Meanwhile, we defend our freedom of choice and our Italian law fertility against state intervention. The ease with which part of the women's public opinion considers positive and important the delegation to the state of the maximum punishment, death penalty or life imprisonment for rape and femicide. The last week, Parliament passed a law about this. After 10 years or more, we are against the life imprisonment. Censorship of an open discussion on asymmetries of gender and class containing the supposed gift by surrogate mothers. The emphasis on rhetoric of universal necessary or extended breastfeeding and the protracted symbiosis between mother and the child is a weekly discussion between me and my daughter having a child of 7 months. She said, because Nestlé was, we are influenced by Nestlé, and they say, and you by the new hegemonic view from the international organization. The emphasis on rhetoric of universal necessary, the tendency to define arranged marriages as predictive of forced marriages. See critical discussion against government proposal by so-called Black Sister and their leader Pragma Patel. The last example, the lack of a reflection of the links between our freedom of love relationships and the new modernity forms in intimate partner violence and the contracts on voluntary sexual subjugation. No discussion about bondage, but many discussion about some other contracts concerning migrant women. These examples allow us to place our questions on violence against women also in the context of the crisis of European political construction. It is marked by a strong dualism, which considers mainly the risk of exogenous cultural conflicts, especially assuming the cultural homogeneity of the migrants from Muslim countries. At the same time, it tries to assert the continuity of European and Western cultural cohesion based on shared universalistic values. In reality, Europe is also divided, very deeply divided, by endogenous cultural conflicts concerning family and bioethic issues, which threaten to undermine cultural pluralism on which the pact of citizenship is based within and between the different countries in European Union. The crusade against the supposed gender ideology is a synthesis of destructive reactions against cultural pluralism. It's not simply a problem of women discussion. A large part of the cultural conflicts, both endogenous and exogenous, regard accessibility to the body of women. The rights related to sexuality and reproduction, and the link between freedom and the responsibility of women in relationship which bring into play their erotic capitals. As for Italy, I would also like to highlight the lack of attention to the debate on legal pluralism that is taking place in Anglo-Saxon sociology and anthropology, and which address the nodes of the relationships between the universalist principle, one law for all, and the possible advantage and disadvantages of use of customary laws, even Sharia, by Muslim women. See the UK campaign One Law for All, but also Samia Bano's book for the second point. In this field, which concerns the interaction taking place between forms of legislation based on different recognition of individual rights, there are many connections with the juridical definitions of gender relationship and many questions to rise on the issues of violence on women. In the light of these considerations, we can rephrase the original question, or coming back to the original question. What is today the starting point for interpreting the male violence against women? We need to go beyond the paradigms of oppression, reframing legal discrimination, the ideas around the legal discrimination, avoiding the hegemony of a criminal legal discourse. We can no longer use the paradigm of oppression, also because we know that all forms of oppression needs a practical consensus. The word consensus is not so good in this case, but I am following a Bourdieusian approach, especially under regimes of almost complete women's formal freedom. Moreover, the relationship between oppression and consensus is judgeable considering differences in women's voice, their differentiated access to public arena, and also their different will to challenge some borders of cultural paradigms that define gender in the community of recognition. See this book of Sumaya Abdelquader, Porto il velo e adoro i Queen, and the Young Italian Muslims campaign on equal opportunities. It seemed to me that the analysis of Marion Iris Young on the culturally encoded change between women's expectations for protection and the men's expectation for care, sexual care included, can be considered as a necessary starting point for interpreting the structure of violence against women in different cultures. There are different models of gender contracts and forms of exchange that are present in the same European countries and the same European space. And this is a problem for us. This is a new problem, especially for Italy, not for some other countries, but for Mediterranean countries especially. And this challenge is working in unknown directions. In this perspective, I would like to highlight more the importance of two concepts, the symbolic violence, Bourdieu, and the degree zero of violence, Zizek. I don't know the pronunciation of Zizek. Yes, but I asked to Marina, Zizek is okay? Zizek is okay. The concept of a symbolic violence applied to gender relations reveals the invisible violence which is hidden in the shared meanings of social practice. Let us observe also what in several societies is considered as degree zero of violence. That is, the rules of behavior considered normal with respect to gender relations established in families and the male and the female access to the resources offered by time and the money. In the more developed countries, the discourse on women's rights and the definitions of violence, or gender-based violence, tends to be presented as a model of non-violence to the other. And it's not to the others. And its normative and the cultural basis are presumed to indicate normal relations between women and men. The new modernity mainstream discourses on the presumed universally shared understanding of women's rights and of peaceful normative gender relationships defined by us, many create labels on the violence against migrant women. After implicit or explicit interpretation of their cultural backwardness, Italy was for many years charged of backwardness because the cultural unity of Mediterranean area around the shame and the honor paradigm. Now the shame and the honor paradigm is coming from the Asia, from the North Africa, and so on. It is impossible to say also in Italy or in other European countries because the European Union. I restudied this point. It's very interesting. This may constitute a second type of victimization for migrant women. I suggest here an exercise with a provocative approach to an 8th of March campaign. I propose some advertisements impossible to show in the public arena, combining gender symbolic violence and the phenomenology of violence against women. First, an image of an European Union family at home in its native country, a young Italian heterosexual couple of educated people. The father is playing with a child on the carpet, and the mother is ironing the trousers of the husband. Question at the bottom of the advertisement. A new patriarchy combined with a new fatherhood. I have some mother and I use in my classes. But a second image, an image of a non-European Union migrant family at home in the new country, a young Muslim couple of educated people. The father is drinking tea. The 3 children, of course, you have only one point. The 3 children are playing on the carpet. 2 veiled women, the wife and her mother-in-law, are standing up at the door of the room waiting for something. Question at the bottom of the advertisement. And not yet a modern family. At the end, an image of women and the men of these 2 typology of family, with a double representation of happiness and of violence in different moments of their life. In the second image, the 2 men are shouting out their hate. Women are crying in silence. Question at the bottom of the advertisement. Different gender orders, same typologies of violence, same humiliation for women. This is a simple exercise to consider what is difficult to discuss about the normality, the degree zero of violence incorporated in the everyday life, our everyday life, not only our, of course. At the end, what about the non una in meno Italian campaign? Is it an everyday utopia in progress? As I hope. Regarding the Italian campaign, I do not consider so important the expected number of participants in the 2 days demonstration. It's not the most important thing for me. There are some more important aspects of the work that has been done in the previous months. three main positive results, or two positive results and something to hope. A real event, a public debate which is spread to various cities in forms of assemblies and very passionate meetings, especially with the presence of young generation, with the lack of the generations in middle in Padua, I don't know, or in Bologna, as I know. The second results, an intersectional organization. The discussion papers were created by women confronting their differences of generations, cultures, profession or no work, nationality and citizenship. I hope non una in meno can continue for constructing perspective for everyday life utopia, which challenges in part the power of the new modernity traps. Many thanks.
Thank you, Franca Bimbi, for this very rich intervention. I leave the floor immediately to Professor Calloni so that we can listen to her. Just following what she said, what does it mean to be activist in Italian academia? So in my case, it means also to be professor in social and political philosophy and human rights, but also to connect the knowledge of experts with the civil society associations, NGOs, with the institutions, with the media, because we have to change also the language of journalists, how they speak in public arena, but also these connections that we can do, organizing seminars and courses, is just also to influence, to give, to change, not only to have ad hoc policies, and also to contribute to change cultural mentalities. What, for instance, I'm doing with my students, because I'm teaching in human rights and citizenship in MA in sociology, but also I'm directing a project which is very important for my student BA in social work. And it's on domestic violence. And it's this program, and we'll organize also in June an international conference on gender-based violence. So I will then send to Professor Spini information, or you can ask me just to give my email. And this is a program we are organizing, and it means Eliminate Domestic Violence Italy project. We have a lot of also materials, videos. There is also a video of Nadia Murad, who was a survivor to the Daesh militants, and she was sold and so on. So you can find also videos about this project. But what I want to say, it's just continuing what also Professor Bimbi said about symbolic violence, and my speech will be focused on the role that imaginaries have in the reproduction of gender-based violence. And this happens both in time of peace, but also in time of war, as Jordana and our colleagues from the former Yugoslavia will say. I mean, there is a reproduction, also war, public and private, political violence, when also there are political conflicts. So I would like to start with some images, mainly devoted what is doing the director, what said about representing women, pictures of women. This is Ratto delle Sabine, when the foundation was based on the rape of another population called the Sabine. And for us, for many centuries, it was the triumph of Roman people. Then I would like this one, it's very, very interesting, what we heard for many years, but we never thought what does it mean. Sorry, okay, this is Desdemona in Otello by Verdi, which is taken from Shakespeare. It's before she will be then killed by Otello. So another example. Okay, another one. Could you help me, please? Okay, Giuseppe Verdi. Okay, this one. I mean, it's because there is, in our life, we have seen a lot of pictures or images, but we never thought that is about feminicide. Just a sec, where is it? But I want to show you, is this one. Okay, was a Carmen by Bizet. Also, Carmen will be killed by her fiancé, and is a femicide. But we never thought, perhaps before, that it was a matter of violence against women. The other thing that I want to talk about is also fairy tales. One upon a time, there lived a woodcutter and his wife. They had 7 children, all boys. They were very poor. There came a very bad year, and the famine was so great that those poor people decided to rid themselves of their children. I'm resolved to lose them in the woods tomorrow. We can leave them without their noticing. And it's the story of Charles Perrault, Little Thumb, when the poor parents decided to leave their children in the wood, knowing that they would die. So we read, when we were children, these stories, and it didn't matter. But this is a form, of course, also of violence, in this case, against children, not only against women. So what I would say in my presentation is that the imaginaries, that is symbolic violence, is present in our daily life. And so my speech is also devoted, aimed at showing in a self-reflexive way how we have also to be aware of the violence that we, women and men, perpetrate in different ways, of course. So domestic violence is a reality that has been denied in public discourse, left in fairy tales and literature and myth, and forgotten in political theory and democracy until recent decades. The core, so my presentation, lies in understanding why that is occurred until when the movement of battered women and the engagement of feminist activists and scholars have debated that the private and the political violence have private domestic roots. For centuries, rational philosophical discourse and as a public dialogue has forgotten, also has put the myth as something pure fantasy, and ignored facts and situations of fear related to concrete experience of violence in the private domain. The denial was due to the fact that the household, where the power of the master was inconvertible, was considered as a space intrinsic to common good. Family was good, was not bad. And the res publica was another thing, was a social actor who was not considered like women and slaves as human beings and citizens. Women, children, slaves were marginalized, relegated and ignored by politics. Contrary to dramatic but contemporary political events, domestic abuses are continuously perpetrated in daily life so that they do not dwell merely in a hypothetical original state of nature, as Thomas Hobbes would say, which has been removed, so we still live in a state of violence, starting from the family. Mythological symbols, as well as fantasy in fairy tales, advocate untold truths about enduring traumas experienced in family.
And the dialectic or love, and we know that is based on contraries, because love could mean many things, but also violence and dependency. The political and legal recognition of sexual and domestic violence as a violation of human rights and fundamental freedoms is recent, dating back only 20 years ago. It is thanks to the efforts of battered women, feminists, that the United Nations Conference on Human Rights held in Vienna in 1993 and the fourth UN conference devoted to women's and human rights and the rights of the girls held in Beijing in 1995 had pointed out the problem, the question of gender-based violence as an issue for international conventions and a crime that is punishable under national legislations and not penal courts, because there is a debate also of violence and rape, we'll see later on, as a crime against humanity and not only a crime against war crimes. Before that, domestic violence was regarded, as said, as a private matter that even liberal democracies did not have to deal with, but also socialism, because for socialism, I did a lot of research with Russian women and women from Eastern Europe, and say, no, socialism couldn't speak about domestic violence because it was a private, but because also couldn't say that socialism could admit also this kind of crime. So we have now a backlash of this situation. So the pain of victims did not find a place where it could be heard and healed. Only recently, this inexpressible offense began to lose the connotation of unspeakable confidence, also by Christian churches, because we see that now also Christian church and Catholic Church has taken the problem in agenda about also forms of rape against boys and girls, becoming an integral part of public debates at the global level and a constitutive element for the legitimacy of political institutions. Two conventions on children and women have signified a paradigm shift in international relations and human rights discourse. The UN General Assembly adopted the Convention on the Right of the Child in 1989, entering in force in 1990, which affirms that state parties shall take all appropriate legislation in order to protect children. Another very important is also the Convention on the Protection of Children Against Sexual Exploitation and Sexual Abuse, so Lanzarote Convention. It is really crucial at the moment also in relation to non-accompanied minors during the migration towards the Mediterranean Sea. Is crucial because of sexual exploitation. More recently, the Convention of Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women was signed, was promoted by the Council of Europe in 2011, and it was very important and effective because it's compulsory also for member states, 47 member states of the Council of Europe, and there is the Grevio, which is a group of experts which who have to see whether nation state which signed this convention also fulfilled their commitments. For Italy it was important, at least in legal terms and in terms of social policies. So now, finally, domestic violence against women, as said in the Istanbul Convention, is understood as a violation of human rights and a form of discrimination. This is what is very effective then in political terms. Convention is issued by the United Nations, the Council of Europe, and the European Union, three sovereign national institutions, have contributed to the increase in the public awareness of the phenomenon that was, until years, as said, was denied or neglected. Also because of the shame that humiliated victims feel when revealing their experience. They are afraid that they will not be believed. Fear is always consequent to a traumatic offense. And as we have seen, While crime drop benefits men most in 2012, a US survey reported that the second cause of death for women under 15 years is being killed by their spousal partner. And it's also the case of 19% of crime or of feminicide committed in Italy. We have in Italy, since 2013, more or less, some laws also about gender-based violence. We have also some survey by the Agency for Fundamental Rights, UN, based in Vienna. And a recent Italian survey has reported that among the perpetrators of violence, at the first place are former husbands or cohabitants, and followed by ex-fiancé and so on. So there are more kinds of men who are killing or offending women, partner, former partner, fiancé, and so on. The first survey on gender-based, in Italy, we have this survey in 2015, and it's not yet all published fully, so there is something that we should know. But as said, there is a decreasing, so to say, of death in relation to previous decades. But what is increasing is the brutality of this crime. I mean, the offense is harder, and there is also the problem of the increasing violence among migrants. So that in Italy or in Milan, I'm also part of a project with Aisha, with Sumaya Abdelkader, who was a student of mine, and is the leader also, is Italian, but of Jordan origin. And she's also the leader of the program, who was mentioned by Professor Bimbi, called Aisha, and also part of some project with the Latin American consulates, which are very, very active in this project called From Vulnerability to business, or that is to make from resilience of women to make the power of women. So they engage these former victims just to be dalla vulnerabilità all'imprenditorialità, entrepreneurship. And during the Expo 2015 in Milan, the women who worked, for instance, in some buildings, Ecuador, Mexico, and so on, they were former victims. So they are very much engaged. Also the international or the community of migrants in Milan, both Islamic, which to say Islam Muslim people say nothing because it's different countries, different cultures, and so on. But Latin American people are very, very active. So we are working as academics also in this sense. What I would say, just to conclude, that we need to have a new cultural awareness towards also this issue. And also we, as political philosophers and academics, we have just to have a different approach also when teaching and making research, and just to train students on this issue. So political philosophy should also, in a such a way, rethink its history and to make new projects. Following the mark, I'm coming from the Frankfurt School, so critical society. So I'm very much engaged also in this sense, just to promote a critical approach to knowledge. So I think that we have to reconsider the connection between the political violence starting from private relationships. The sense of deprivation and humiliation rises always from the proximity. As Eleanor Roosevelt, and because I'm here in the host of a US institution in a Trump age, president of the UN Commission, which delivered the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, stated in a discourse done in 1958, where, after all, do universal human rights begin? In small places, close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. The sense of violated dignity always originates ex negativo from experiences of misrecognition in context of daily lives. However, the a threatened child or a violated adult must. Also the sentiment, from this experience of violation, we can have a sentiment of dignity through the powerful and ambivalent dialect of fantasy. What we see in the images is a pretense, a claim for human dignity. Violence is like a mirror that reflects a frightening eventuality. Each of us can transmute himself or herself into a perpetrator. That is a monster, and this is not merely a matter of pure fantasy. So when we talk about fantasy, we have not to talk about only the other, but to reflect upon also our behaviors. So concluding, I would say that usually 8th of March was a day aimed at celebrating women's achievements in terms of socio-economical rights and also fundamental freedom. Today we celebrate, through the march and the strike, we celebrate something that did not work. We talk about gender-based violence, and this we should reflect upon why does it happen. And last word, I would hope, perhaps next year, on the next conference, just to meet in this room not only women, because I think that the issue of gender-based violence is not a matter of women, but is a matter of men, and we have to make an alliance. Just in order to change violent mentality, we have the technician, and we have, two. Okay, but they came but more men, so we are very glad, because we need to make an alliance just to change, also form of violence which characterize the lives of women, children, but also men. And I hope that we have a lot to do again in the future. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Professor Calloni. I invite immediately the other two speakers. We are in a hurry because they have to go to the manifestations, Piazza Santissima Annunziata. So as Professor Spini said, the second part of this session is devoted to activism with Gaia Tomaselli, who is here for the Associazione Artemisia. Associazione Artemisia is based in Florence. It's one of the most important anti-violence centers in Italy, one of the first, I think we can say, one of the first association tackling gender violence. Elena di Padova is here as an activist as well. She worked with different women in Italy and abroad. Then you can introduce yourselves as well. And she is here as an activist of Non Una di Meno, No One Less, which is a movement that organized today's strike. So we are all dressed in pink and black for this reason. So I leave the floor to them.
So hello, as she said, my name is Gaia Tomaselli. I work for Artemisia since 4 years. And in fact, Artemisia is the anti-violence center here in Florence. And we give assistance to all the women that are based in Florence and in the surroundings. And our center was founded about 25 years ago, and it was one of the first in Italy. And we are special also because we do not only take care about violence against women, but also violence against children. Also because in the years of our experience, we discovered that, of course, the children are many times involved when the mother is victim of violence. This means that the children assist to what we called assisted violence. Also because sometimes we ask to the women, did the children assist to the violence? And they say no, which in a sense is not true. No is not the answer just because they are not in the room. Because if you think of when you were kids and you hear your parents arguing, of course you can hear them from the other room. So anyway, the children always assist the violence. That's why we started working also with the children of assisted violence, and after that we specialized, and we also now deal since many, many years with children that has been abused in childhood, so children that suffer of sexual abuse, of violence against them from parents or people outside the family, that could be educators or any other figure that could be around the children. And as well, we also work with adults that has been abused when they were children and they never had the opportunity to ask for help, but the reflex of the violence, if you never face it, they remain in the person. So now that they become adults, many of them ask for help, and so we take care of all these aspects of violence here in Florence. And we also run 2 shelter houses. So this is the place that women at very high risk are placed in order to be protected. And when we talk about high risk, we mean that their life could be in real danger. And of course, we work in the years, we developed a big net. So we work with the municipality of Florence and with the police, with the judges, with the justice. We provide to women legal assistance, not for all their needs, but they can have a legal advice, free legal advice at our association, and then if they decide to go on with a complaint, our lawyers could follow them. So this is just to give you an idea of who we are. And in Italy, there are, as you can see, about 125 anti-violence centers, and most of them are part of this DIRE, that is a national coordination of the anti-violence centers, because every anti-violence center in Italy is a private association. Many of them are managed only by women. So the idea, especially of the DIRE Anti-Violence Center, is that only women work inside the centers. This is because the women, they feel more comfortable to ask for help and have assistance from another woman and not from a man, especially because what they've been facing till the moment they ask for help. So all the centers, I was saying, they are all private. There is nothing organized by the state. So many of the centers, of course, have conventions with the municipalities, with the regions, but they are all private. So it doesn't exist a state system to assist the women here in Italy at the moment. We hope that maybe one day, but not now. And so that's why there is this coordination between all the centers, because of course, being all local realities, everyone has started on their own, and everyone has its methods. So that's why we realized a few years ago that we needed a national coordination in order to exchange the methods of work and also to be more powerful again with the institutions in order to point what are the needs of the anti-violence centers, what are also the political actions that we would like for the government to do in order to better protect the women, and also to invest more money with the anti-violence centers and in the campaigns and to protect the women. So as you can see, in Italy, not every anti-violence center has shelter houses, And many of the shelter houses has been, in the years, obliged to shut down because there was not enough money to run them. Also because being private, many of the times the shelter houses are just flats rented by the anti-violence center, for which the centers have to pay the rent, to pay the bills, and to pay everything. And so the idea is that Italy needs approximately 5,000 places in the shelter houses, but at the moment, as you can see, we only can give 500. That's a big need of money from the institutions to be invested on these kind of things, also because the shelter houses sometimes are the only thing that can protect a woman when she is in big dangers. Also, the laws are a little bit late in taking care about the needs. So the last law that was approved, it was number 119 in 2013. So it's a very recent law. And this is the law against feminicide. And since 2014, the government has started a national plan of money support to the anti-violence center, but is a very recent intervention from the government, and the money is still not enough because the anti-violence center are still nowadays shutting down the doors all over Italy. So we ratified the Istanbul Convention, but of course, ratifying the convention doesn't mean to immediately set up all the laws that the convention wants the states to have. So there is still a lot of work to do in this sense in order to have all the necessary laws to protect the women and also to punish the man that does the violences. So, of course, our mission is to protect women and children against violence, also because we think that not only this is a traumatic experience that the women and the children face, but it is a violation of the human rights of all the people that suffer of this kind of domestic violence. And we operate with all the forms of violence. This means also what we call economic violence, psychological violence, because all these violences, also if there is not the physical violence, are a big stop to the empowerment of the women, and they can feel imprisoned in their life. If you think about economic violence, this means that, for example, my husband controls every euro I spend. So, so you spent 10 euros to go to the cinema with your friend Simona. Why did you went there? And why did you spend this money? And do you think it's really worth to spend 10 euros to go out with your friend and not with me? And this happens every day, for every coffee you buy, for everything you buy. And it's every day, all the day, every week of the year, every month. And this really makes you feel imprisoned. You cannot, also if you have a work and he has to deal with your money, the money that you earn, and that you cannot spend as you want to. Okay, so it's normal in a family to decide how we spend the money together for big expensive, but it is not normal that somebody tells you and asks you for a justification for everything you spend. And this happens in every aspect of the life. So it could be the economical, it could be the psychological. Why do you go out with your friends? Why don't you stay home? Why don't you take care about the children? and then all the critics, and this is still psychological violence. So you're a bad mother, you're a horrible housekeeper, and you should do this, that, you should do this in this way and not in that way, and everything you do is horrible and is very bad done. So all this criticism makes the women lose their power, they lose confidence, and that's why sometimes we ask ourselves, but why does women don't just get out from this kind of relationships? And the professors before were talking to you about fear, and the fear happens also if there is not a physical violence, because you fear that you can maybe lose your children, because many men tell the woman, if you try to leave me, I'm going to keep the children. Of course, the judge is not going to give you the children. I'm going to keep all the friends. I keep the house. I keep everything. So you're going to be just in the middle of the street alone without anything. No money, no children, no families, nobody to trust and to ask help for. So also psychological violence, if perpetuated for years and years, could really, how can I say, the person is no more the one she was at the beginning. She is no more, she has no more autonomy. And so she, at one point, thinks that she cannot go anywhere on her own. And that she thinks she's not able to do anything without her husband or her partner or her fiancé. And so that's one of our mission, to really not only help women to exit violence situations, but to re-empower the women in order that they can reappropriate of their lives. So we've got many intervention methods, as you can see from this slide, and of course all the persons that work for the Associazione are professionals, very trained, especially on violence, and so they are able to recognize all the signs of risk for the women, and so this gives them the ability to understand the situations and judge if they are a high-risk situation or what kind of intervention we need to do in order to help these women. So as I was saying, we work in a net with the social services, with the municipality, with hospitals and police and judges, and this is a big help not to be alone, but to work with other realities on the territory in order to provide the best service to the women. Okay, I jumped this one because I'm not the big expert as my colleague is, but you can have a fast read to it. So this is another idea of all the organizations we work with in NET. And we also have many projects of additional services, and one of the most important is l'asilo che non c'è, that is the nursery that doesn't exist, because some of these women, especially when they have to, for example, run away in a very high-risk situation and be set in the shelter houses, sometimes they don't have a job, they need a new job, and they find at the beginning, if they don't have very high qualifications, they are obliged to accept any kind of jobs. And these jobs could be also, for example, at night in cleaning offices. So in moments of the day where the normal nurseries are not open, but they need somebody to take care about the children. And of course, if they are in a shelter house, they cannot ask their relatives, because if they ask the relative to come and take care about the children, they will say where the shelter house is, and of course the shelter house has a secret address. So we provide this nursery that doesn't exist, so we have professionals that take care about the kids on Saturdays or Sundays or during public holidays where the normal nurseries are closed. And another important project is Auser Abitare Solidale, and it's a project that has the goal to put together, for example, elderly people that have big houses and they remained alone, so they live alone in big houses, and maybe they need somebody to be at home with them. And we combine them with the women that, for example, when they exit the shelter houses, they need a place where to go and to live, but they've not enough money to afford a normal rent. So this is a kind of cooperation. So the older person gives the part of the house, and the mother with the children, for example, they could be of help to the older person, and they have a house where to live without spending too much money. So this is just to give you a few numbers of the violence in Italy. So as you can see, approximately 7 million women have suffered during their life of some form of physical or sexual violence. And you can see almost more than 500,000 has been victims of rape in our country in the years. And of course all these data are not so precise because many women doesn't ask for help, doesn't put a complaint, so they are always only the, let's say, the emerged data of what we can have from the women that ask for help. And so you can see that last year 116 women have been killed in Italy, and most of them have been killed by their husbands, boyfriends or partners, or other family members. They could be the fathers, the brothers. And in 2015 they were 128, so the numbers in the years are mainly always the same. So there are small decreases or small increases from a year to the other, but more or less a woman every 3 days is killed in Italy every year. And as far as we are concerned, so you can see that considering that Florence has approximately 400,000 people living in town, and with the surroundings we are approximately 1.5 million, in 20 years of work we had deal with more than 12,000 requests of help that we dealt in these years. And only last year's the requests that we've been dealing have been more than 1,300. And you can see that most of them were women, and when I say that 2004 were the women in charge from the previous years, it means that, of course, if a woman asks for help, we hope that we are able to empower her and to resolve all the situations in a few months. But of course, the how can I say, the results of the violence, so the damages and the wounds that the violence does in the psychology of a woman, they last for a long, long time. So depending on the situations, there are women that could start a program in 2014 and they could need help and psychological help and assistance for many, many years. That's why we have cases that we are still taking care about since last year or since 2 years ago or maybe 3 years ago. So the total requests of last year's were 100 and 300, and more than 1,000 anyway were new requests between children and women and adults that have suffered violence in childhood. So this is mainly what we do in Florence, and we still hope to go on doing it.
So we can immediately listen to Elena. Thank you to Gaia Tomaselli for this 20 minutes intervention. And we can listen to Elena di Padova. She will speak about Non Una di Meno, about the movement.
Hi, everyone. Yes, my name is Elena di Padova. I belong to Non Una di Meno network. Non Una di Meno means no one less, and is a feminist network that has born a little bit more than 1 year ago. So I will explain a little bit how we got here today, because today it's a big international event. There's the Global Women's Strike, many of you might know. Non Una di Meno is one of the actors leading to this the Global Women's Strike, that is called International Women's Strike, Empower Internacional de Mujeres. This idea was firstly launched by the Argentinian network, Ni Una Menos, which has a similar name. We took inspiration, the name of our network, we took inspiration from Ni Una Menos, even though it's a different network. It's based in Italy, but our strategy takes inspiration from Ni Una Menos. Ni Una Menos started to develop this idea to have an international women's strike. People might be a bit surprised at why the 8th of March, we always have events all over the world. So this is something that is not new, that we have a demonstration today. They think that it is new. They think that also you saw that the 25th of November, we have many demonstrations all around the world. So this is something not new. Feminism is not new as well. What is new today is that we managed to have a coordinated effort all around the world. So we have here, today we have 48 countries in the world participating in this International Women's Strike. You see, it's not the whole world, but it's, no? To be the first experiment to have a strike at international level, I think is quite good. So the strike means that, of course, all these women's movement, they try to strike, to protest, to strike from productive and reproductive work. A slogan that has been going on, it says, if we are not worth it, we strike. It means if we are not worth it, we strike from productive work, of course, that we are more or less valued than men in productive work, but also reproductive work. Reproductive work, it's a big issue within the movement as well, because reproductive work is something that women do for free every single day, but it's less than worth it, and it's just considered that we expect you do that, but it's just the mean and the value. So we have here 48 countries, and what we do, those countries who can have strikes, women's organization will do strikes. In some countries, it's not allowed to have strikes, so we have a coordinated effort to have 6 p.m. protest in local time in every venue. So I don't know which one would start first, I think. But anyway, we have an hashtag, following, it's like a way, following every protest, following from 6 p.m., the first one, towards the last one. This is to say that even though like our network started a little bit more than 1 year ago, but this is not, you know, in feminism we have so many movements, so many remaking, so many like ways of doing things, so many misunderstandings sometimes. So there's just always new configurations that we have. In our case, like in the case in Italy, our movement was really inspired by the protests that they had in Madrid. I don't know if you know about what happened in Spain in 2014 with the Gaia law. The Gaia law was trying to restrict abortion rights and to allow abortion only in just few limited cases, just in case of serious health damage for the woman. So in practice, Spanish women wouldn't have any abortion rights. So what happened is that you see thousands of women went in different protests in Madrid, and they managed to make the minister who proposed the law to step down. In Italy, our movement, now it's called Non Una di Meno, but before we had a different name, it's called Io Decido, that was inspired as well by Yo Decido in Spain. Yo Decido means I decide. It means I decide on my body, I decide if taking a contraception, if not taking contraception, I want to have sex education, and I want to have the right of free and legal abortion. So in Italy, this issue was really important because in Italy we have, after many years of Berlusconi's power, which was one of the most misogynistic government. But anyway, the Italian movement got really against the Berlusconi way of doing things. But the protest against the abortion law in Spain raised up many issues that we have in Italy. In Italy, we have a law that allows abortion, but in fact, the laws is there, but in fact, in practice, it's not a real right for women, because there are many doctors who apply what we call, in English, I think it's conscience clause or conscientious objection, which means on the basis of your own faith, in Italy, Catholic faith, you can refuse to practice abortion. So there are many regions in Italy, especially in the south, where these doctors are about 90%. So you can realize that many women don't have, in practice, the right to abortion, to perform abortion. So, and they have, in the end, maybe they manage to do that, but they have to go through many different obstacles. So it's this issue of abortion rights make our movement revamp again. And then we had other protests that developed over the years. That was, especially in 2015, there was the Buenos Aires protest around in Argentina with Ni Una Menos in Argentina. These protests were sparked by a series of feminicides that were acted in very brutal ways against very young women. Especially, there were a couple of cases that sparked protests. And then the Argentinian women started with the first big protest, and then the second protest, they had a big strike. After that, we had many other, we had many other solidarity protests. So what happened is just a main big demonstration, after that many other big demonstrations in solidarity of what was happening in Argentina. So what happened in Argentina was replicated in solidarity protests around the world. And that happened also together with the Black Monday in Poland. That was October 2016. They had a similar case as in Spain. There was a law further criminalizing abortion. Abortion was already banned, but this law brought more restriction to abortion. So Polish women went to the street, they dressed all in black, and what was called the Black Monday, they wanted to say, okay, now today we strike. We want to stop the country, we want to see if we stop and we abstain from productive and reproductive work. We want to see what will happen if we paralyze the country. So all these ideas went around, and then what was interesting, we start contaminating each other with different ideas. So the idea of the Argentinian women started to say, oh, we should take the idea of the protest of the Polish women. So this idea of having an international strike was gaining over again. Also because also in the case of Poland, different groups in different countries started to have protests in solidarity of the Polish women. And what happened was also with the Women's March in different parts of the US, we had different demonstrations around the world supporting the Sisters' March. We saw that there was a growing solidarity among all these groups. And then this was an example of Non Una di Meno protest on the 25th of November. 25th of November, many organizations around the world protested against violence against women. This is when the idea of having international strike started to gain ground. And also the US women joined in this fight. It's a bit difficult to say, but I wanted to talk a bit about what is common between all these groups, because it's, of course, we have similar themes, which is violence against women. We have different approaches, and we are all different. So I've been trying to throw a line of like common characteristics we have all around the world, even though it's a bit difficult to generalize. But also applying what is happening around the world, what I'm getting from the sense of what's happening around the world, what's happening in Italy, I would say that now what is happening now, it's a real grassroots movement that is not including only very young people. It's true, it's including very young people. What's happening now, it's like in Italy, in the past, the feminist movement was pretty much led by labor unions and legal organization. Now, what's happening, we widen the base. We have some of this, yeah, we still have many of this, but we have also different realities that is belonging to more informal organizations like collectives and non-registered organizations, groups that are just gathering because they want to gather. So it's what we praise within this movement. It's the horizontal way we do things. We had a big assembly in Bologna, the 4th and 5th of February, and this was amazing. We were 2,000 people, and we were divided in 8 different groups. Each of us could talk, could have the chance to talk and express their views, and to have, we had the 4-minute rule, and each of us could have that voice put there in the document that we produce in the end. Sometimes it was not an easy process. Some voices maybe were a little bit more predominant, some others less. But what we're trying now is to bring more horizontal politics within our movement, to disrupt hierarchies within our movement, and to bring something that is really from grassroots. What we have as principle, inclusion, diversity, and the intersectionality. Inclusion means people from all different ethnicities, gender identities, sexual orientation, from all kinds of realities, class, etc. What we praise is diversity, yes, because we try to be as much inclusive as we like. But then there was a principle that was taken a little bit back. There was the principle of separatism. In the past, we didn't include men within the movement, but now we had this step forward that to fight against violence against women, we need to have men within the movement. This idea of diversity is expressed by, you might have seen the matryoshka that we see as a symbol of our movement. The matryoshka means infinity, means multiple identities that women have. So women can be many different ways. We can't be confined to just one identity. So we can be many multiple ways, and we don't want to be restricted to the gender stereotypes that the society wants us to have. And then we have an approach to violence that it sees violence as not as an isolated case, but as a structural phenomenon. A structural phenomenon, which means that we believe that violence is rooted in our society, is rooted in our culture. So we need, feminicides are not just the expression of male violence against women. It's just the tip of the iceberg, because there's the society around that legitimizes violence. So what we propose as a network, we want our culture to change, but we need to change our culture from bottom up. So what we do, we are very small. Right now, we're not sure if today will be a success or not. But we try to do very little action, like subvertising, like you see the image, subvertising the image of like the masculine image. Or we're trying to go to schools and propose a different approach to education, a diversity education. So we try to do this we try to start from ourselves. And another issue that we've been trying to deal with, it's about the image of the victims, of the survivors of violence. We don't want these women just to be victims. We don't want them to be portrayed as victims, but to start to change the idea of the media has about gender-based violence. Women, we need to change the imaginary we have, and not to see women as just victims, to blame them and see and share with them the responsibility because they've been raped. We have to change the imaginary that we have and see women in their own self-determination, in their own autonomy, in their own potentiality as a way to get over it. You can see in our internet platform, I don't have time now to explain the 8 points of the 8th of March, but we have a platform with around 8 different points that we developed in Bologna around many different themes, what we would like to have in different spheres like media, reproductive health, the right to for migrant women to live in our country. But you can see, I think we have an English version as well, so for more information you can go over it. Just short information to say that today there's a demonstration, 6 p.m., starting from Piazza Santissima Annunziata. If you can, dress all black with fuchsia scarf. And if you can, bring something that is very rumorous, like very noisy, like with whistles, pots, or wherever you have, to be very noisy, because we need to be present there. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena di Padova. I think we have some time to ask questions, or if someone wants to make comments on the different papers.
Thank you. I was curious, Elena, on your opinion on the critique of the women's strike as a day for privileged protesters and privileged women who can afford, either financially or if it's by abstaining from unpaid labor. What's your opinion on that kind of critique of the movement?
I want to add that this morning my daughter didn't go to school because of the strike, and many parents were angry with the strike. So there was a big result, at least in Florence, in many primary schools. We can be happy with that, but on the same time, I think that this is a question that we must answer to.
My name is Francesca Scrinzi. I'm a sociology currently based at the European University Institute. I just wanted to raise an issue which I think is important today. Anti-immigration and populist radical right, xenophobic movements and political parties, as you know, are on the rise across Europe and beyond Europe, of course. And I think it's interesting today to note that many of these parties and movements are appropriating ideas which are traditionally left-wing and feminist ideas, like the idea that we need to counter violence against women. So these parties, for example, say that we need to defend our native women from violence perpetrated by migrant men. So they are using feminist ideas, locating them within their anti-immigration xenophobic agenda. So I think feminists who mobilize to stop violence against women today need to be aware of these, and because of course this complicates their task enormously.
So yeah, I was impressed. You know, I do a lot of symbolism, so I was impressed with the fact that you pulled out these images from the classical aesthetics sorts. I was wondering if you could tell us where exactly are they coming from, meaning where the motives are coming from. We've seen who has painted the paintings, but it would be more interesting to find out what is the original source of the ideas of presenting women as such in these works of art.
Hi, yes, just a comment on the issue of symbolic violence. I think you mentioned that there is I think in different intervention you said that there is a lot of work to be done at symbolic level. We have seen the images, the music that we often don't even recognize as being violent, whereas we are much more prone to seeing the violence in different cultures. So this issue that she was also, Francesca Scrinzi was raising now. The question is, to Professor Bimbi, I'm not sure I got the concept of what it means to go beyond the paradigm of oppression, so if you can explain that again. And a question to Elena di Padova. We were talking about this yesterday as well, about intersectional feminism. So we were saying, this is the point of the movement, but in the brochure it's written, we support the rights of migrants, as if migrants are something outside the movement. So to what extent is the movement really diverse and plural? I suppose there is also a difference, for instance, in relation to the marches in the US, where intersectional feminism was really key, because there women that we would call from different ethnic backgrounds have prominent positions, are leaders, whereas in Italy, migration is more recent, so maybe there is still this divide. So I wanted to comment you on this.
Posso? Yes. Cioè, grazie. No, I mean, it is a question, I would say, probably for Elena, but I would say for all of you, and it has to do with the word victim. Because on the one hand, I perfectly understand the need to go beyond the representation of women as victims, etc., etc. So that's very important, to work, on the empowerment and so on and so forth. On the other hand, I would like, however, to make a point in defense of the word victim. Because if one person declares herself a victim, it means that wrong has been inflicted. And so I would also say that it is important to call victims victims in order to denounce that a right has been violated, the suffering has been inflicted, that wrong was done. So I would like to know your take on this.
So I think was for Elena di Padova. And maybe you can answer to 2 questions about movement, or 3 questions.
According to the first one, on the fact that that many women are not this privileged to go to work, because otherwise they will lose their own money, otherwise they will be fired. Many of them are in a precarious position. Yes, we are. When doing this platform, we were aware of this. That's why what we did. Who can strike? We strike. We organize this demonstration at 6 p.m. so that the majority of women can participate anyway, because we know it's this somehow this was a kind of experiment to try to see what the world would do without having some of the women out of work, but it was not a way of excluding women from their right to strike. Yes, so we tried to find solutions to include all of us. According to the intersectional approach, yes, we had, as new emerging movement, we had issues about this. There was, in Bologna, there were just a few migrant women. So this was a limitation of the women. Probably, I was not in that table, I was in a different table, so I'm not really, I'm not really sure around the process which developed that point, but I know that there was a difficulty, a challenge from our movement to include migrant women. There were not so many migrant women there, so this is something we need to question within the movement and try to find new strategies to have a better involvement.
Sorry because my age, because I have some answer to give to Elena, because I am an historical feminist, and it's not true that we admit as feminist movement union representative or party representative during the demonstration or in the feminist group. So there are many questions on the floor. It's very interesting. The two levels, the level of reflection, research, and the level of activism. For example, in Italy, the history of feminist movement is written in different versions, of course. Perhaps in Tuscany and in Emilia-Romagna, because they were two red regions, we have some more connection between feminism and women representative institution. Of course, you have at a personal level, but no men, no politicians in the demonstration and so on. I was also in the parliament, so I could know this distinction between movement and institutions is very important. Also, it's very important to discuss deeply the idea of separatism. Why? Because yesterday, near to my department, there is a label for the strike with only seven male students speaking about. I like very much Nadine Gordimer books. And I learned by Nadine Gordimer the difference to have allies and to fight for ourselves. This is my problem with the strike. And I suppose that the problem of migrant women is very important, not only in this case, because it's true that some points objective on gender-based violence and so on now are also in the right movements in Europe. Why? It's a question for us. For example, I started to be responsible for the Anti-Violence Center of Venice since 1994. And now I could say that in the past, we are so sure that it was better that only women was working in the anti-violence center. But why? Not only because women prefer, but also because the anti-violence centers were, and in part are, also a place of political debate. But now political debate around violence is larger, and they are resistant. But for example, there is a big divide between public center and this center of dire networks. I had many problems in the past, but now it's very interesting because of course the political power could receive advantages of this divide, and now is very big problem because there are some anti-violence centers that have not the same perspective than me and you. Many problems. And for me, beyond oppression, because oppression can have, it's impossible to have the classical definition of oppression. And for this I use much more symbolic violence, the discussion of zero-degree violence, and because this problem of relationship with not only migrant women, but the presence of migrant people in here, I say here, is related also, we have this problem that we think that they are oppressed, and they are oppressed because their culture. And you, in case, you are victim because some psychological problem of our males, because character, because this general paradigm of power, manpower, it doesn't have any sense today. No, we have many gender contracts between women and men. I'm very interested with some friends, a colleague working or being in LGBT movement, because they started to study now, to reflect now around the violence in the same-sex couple. And this problem, this idea of Iris Young about this relationship between the women's demand for protection and the men's demand for care is one of the roots of feminicide. Much more, I don't like the name feminicide.
Thank you. Maybe Gaia wants to say something about the status of victim, and then...
Being an anti-violence center, we do agree with you. So I know that there is a big issue on the word of victims, and people that want to use the word and people that don't want to. As far as we are concerned, we use the word victims because victims are victims, and it is important. So it is important to underline that they are victims of something that they shouldn't be facing, and it is important to use the word victim because it is important to underline that they are facing either a crime or anyway something that they should not face. So also psychological violence is a kind of a crime. Of course, there is not a real punishment by the law, but it's a crime in our opinion. And so you are a victim, you are facing something that you should not face. And so it is important to use this term. And then the idea is that the work of the Anti-Violence Center or of the net that helps victims is to then empower them not to be victims anymore, but at the end of the process of getting out of violence. So when you're suffering violence, you are a victim. That's our idea.
I'm very much interested and also so to say supportive of this march, also because we have a semantical change in the notion of strike, because usually strike has to do with trade unions, has to do with the fact that we don't want to work, while now strike has a meaning also of march in the new reconceptualization of women's mobilization, and I think that is a new way to approach women's movements with new keywords. And for the reason I don't agree with you that your movement is only against liberal feminism, because what do you mean for liberal feminism? Because liberal feminism means a lot of things. Perhaps you are against about a related notion of the subject as autonomous, while you support an idea of concrete self. But what I want to say is that if you are intersectional, you have to take the inheritance, but also to overlap the limits of previous form of feminisms, plural. Because I worked on Anna Kuleshov, who was one of the founders of the Italian socialism. She was Jewish and Russian and a doctor in medicine. And for instance, I worked and it was interesting what is criticism against towards Mozzoni, because she was a liberal bourgeois feminist while she was a socialist feminist. But then if you use the concept of intersectionality, we don't have to forget that it was first used by black feminism against the maternalism of Western feminists, so that the women from other parts of the world wanted to say things in their own voice and not just to use the voice that we are Western women, you are weak, so we can't speak in your name. No, each person, and this was Beijing, was very important for that, we speak for that. So I don't think that it's correct to say that the movement is only against liberal feminism, but it's against perhaps also the theory of the ontological and essentialist theory of sexual difference, because it's very hierarchical, because the Libreria delle Donne in Milano, because it's the authority of the mother against the daughter and so on. And as critical theorist, I was always against this kind of approach because I'm more horizontal. So I think that if you use correctly the word, the concept of intersectionality, not also to say that women are weak but are resilient, you have to be aware that you have to deal with all traditional feminism in order to overcome also their limits because of the migrants, because of globalization, because of new nationalism, because of what to say xenophobic tendency, populism, and so on. So this is the first thing. Second thing has to do with the issue of literature, Gordana. So this is part of a broader work I'm doing about imaginaries and literary, also narratives, because I think that because of this symbolic representation, when or the heroic, the hero and so on, in many cases in crisis situation or in war situation, these imageries are able to mobilize also people to violence, to legitimize. No, it's what I'm saying, that also the symbols are very much used in situation of crisis, also just to legitimate political violence. About your question, I talk about the Sabines because my work was about also how myths of foundation of cities are based on intrafamiliar violence and rape. And I studied 3 myths. One is, as you see, Rome. Rome, you know that the mother of Romolo and Remo was raped by God, and they were left, so a wolf, a female wolf, gave them to milk. But then one of the twin killed the other twin, and Romolo killed Remo due to the name to give to the city, to Rome, and then it was a rape because they need women. So it's a chain of violence in relation to found a civilization, Roman civilization. Second, Thebe, Antigone. Antigone, you know that it was based not only because of Oedipus, but because of the Oedipus' father, Laio, who raped a child. And this was maledicted by the god. Third, Athens. It seems that Athena was a protector of Athena, chosen freely by the citizen, but we know that Athena was born from the head of her father. And her father ate Athena's mother, because he was Zeus, who was fearing that he would have been killed by a child of him. So the mother died and the child grown up in the head. So what is this kind of imaginaries, so that only in the myth remained this remember of the suffering of children and women, but not in political philosophy, on politics, on liberal democracy as well. What I show was 2 parts, one from Otello, not only Shakespeare but Verdi, and the other was Bizet, Carmen, and the 2 feminicides, which for us was not an issue until recent year. But I took the opera, it's another part of my studies, because, you know, the opera is taken in as the frame is a Greek tragedy, so that in the end somebody should die. But what is very interesting is that in the opera are always women who die, and the librettos are written by men. And these women are great sentiment, the best person as possible, but then they are killed. Why? And so I study why men try to put in women what they couldn't do, what they couldn't say. So this is a longer, so to say, work I'm doing, but partly in English, partly in Italian. And so the same is for fairy tales, not only Little Dump, but also Cappuccetto Rosso, what is by Grimm, Red Hat, where I try to reanalyze the image of the wolf as somebody goes into the house and eats the grandmother and the child, and I think that the wolf is the uncle. This is my interpretation. But I mean, also this kind of violence in the house. So this was my answer. And about the victims, I also agree to use the notion of victims, also because in nowadays, and I work also to work about that, because it's a symbol, has become the symbol of any form of radical violation and dehumanization in different forms. And we know that after the World War II, the victims were the victims of the Holocaust, and the importance to be witness of what's happened, not to forget, but the problem that the people who had to remember what happened to them is the form of victimization, second victimization. So the problem when you have to remember what's happened to you, how you have to overcome your trauma. This is clear to me also when I host in Milan. Nadia Murad was victim of the Yazidi women, religious minority, was victim of the Daesh warriors. And it's clear that is a really pain for her. And she had to make, after this tour she did, also she had to go back to psychotherapy to be helped. Because when a woman had violence, sexual violence, raped, or a war trauma, you see in her eyes. That's clear. And also men, because also in the former Yugoslavia, a lot of men were raped, I mean mechanically, And also we saw in France. But while women talk, in your country, many women committed suicide, but men don't speak about this trauma they have because it's not a matter of a hero. So these men are really deeply traumatized. What's happened to this black guy in France? If we wouldn't have the camera, it would have been, nobody would have believed to him. So I'm agree also about the victims, but against also the theater of suffering. I mean, the instrumentalization of media towards the life of these things. So I hate this picture with women, with also now we word, with victim with black thing, give me €2 because they are suffering. And so women are victims, all thought autonomous human beings and with dignity. Otherwise, other thing, I think that, for instance, the picture of victims, it's a very delicate thing. Also, I remember the pictures of the two kids, one who died from Syria on the beach in Turkey. And, but this was very important because it mobilized also public opinion against the war in Syria, but also it was not enough. Or the child after a bombardment in Aleppo. And these pictures, they are ambivalent because on one side, remember us what we have to do against the war. The other side is very much instrumentalized, so we have always to pay attention about against the theater of suffering because victims really suffer.
A little thing about the concept of victimhood. I'm on the same page with you. There's one point that I think it's about the idea of victimhood is related to is the idea of helplessness. So what we need to get over it, because of course women have the right to be called victim, of course, but they have to be represented as survivors. So they are victims, but they can't get over it. The problem is when you represent them as there's no other choice, you are victim and you have to be there as a victim for your whole life. There's a problem. This idea is reproducing violence because it's taking the idea of women as victim forever, perpetrator forever. So this is just replicates violence.
No, I agree against the fixity of roles because otherwise the theater. We don't want theater, we are for mobility, the possibility to change what's that. When I worked with survivors to the Rwanda genocides and also with Amor Mazovic, who is the head of the commission in Bosnia for the DNA proof in order to go to the mass graves. What is very clear that they want to be survivant, but to be again to life. But the problem of these people is the trauma to be a survivor. So it's like Primo Levi in his book. They are not happy to be survivor, but the fact why did I survive and not the other. So it's a huge legacy that, because it's not a matter individual when they survive, but they survive because other died. So it's a thing that they speak also in the name of other kidnapped, tortured, died, or the mortal rest, because there's another research I'm doing about the right to mortal rest, because you know that the Mediterranean Sea is the deadliest borders in the world. We had about 15,000 people, and now in Milan we have a colleague who is a forensic anthropologist who is mapping the DNA of mortal rest found in the Mediterranean or in the ship. And I talked to Manuela Kusterman, who is a doctor in medicine, a gynecologist, who is working also with these women, who is Cattaneo, Professor Cattaneo. And we were debating about the thing, because they did abortion to women who were raped during the Libyan travels, but now they said that they did a mistake because they didn't took the DNA of the fetus, because they discovered that in this case they could also make, to take on the court rapists and also people who tortured these women. So this is a new frontier that we are debating also in Milan, and think also we have to generalize also this debate.
I am against to use a victim as a symbol. But of course, you are forced to work with the victim. So I think it's not possible to go out of this ambivalence, but it's important because this image of victims is now appropriate by the right, by some different anti-violence center, and so on. And in this point, there is also the relationship with the migrant women. There is a very seminal article of Kimberly Crenshaw on mapping margins, on the relationship between women, white women working in the shelter, and asking to color women to be converted to their feminism. This is one of the big problems for us. And you need to have many, many years of experience as Artemisia to know deeply this.
Okay, thank you to all the speakers. I think we had a very interesting discussion. We saw the complexity of these issues. I think that some divergences also emerged. Feminism is a work in progress, is a plural movement, and so I think that it is important to be aware of this and to have places like this to discuss together. Thank you very much.